All right, welcome everybody to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host, me, Scott Sinclair. Thank you for joining us, and Rob Fraser, founder and CEO of Outweigh. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Scott, great to be back.
Yeah, we did a show before, but before I say that, I just have to point out that it is a beautiful, sunny, warm July afternoon. I live in British Columbia. You live in British Columbia. I have mountain bike trails and mountains right outside my door. You have ocean and mountain bike trails right outside your door. Yet here we are, two guys shooting another podcast. I don't know what's wrong with us, Rob.
Yeah, I don't know. Especially since this summer, I don't know about where you are in BC, but it's been quite delayed. This is like one of our first actual nice days of the year, basically. We kind of seem to have skipped spring. Yeah, the island's been tough. So yeah, I'll try to spend more time. I thought about maybe doing this recording outside, but there's a lot of noise. But I'm trying to take all my meetings, calls, and everything outside these days and just get the sun.
Good for you. Rob, we did this, we did a podcast before, back when the Winning Momentum podcast was branded as Martinis with Scott, and back when Outweigh was branded Endure. And Endure, we have a broader, larger, and perhaps different audience at this point. So I'm going to go backwards just a little bit, even if we repeat ourselves. But Endure was claimed to be a brand, was a brand. Did we say was or is? Probably was.
I mean,
right?
I guess both. Yeah, was under that name, but same company. So it is a was-is sort of situation.
Yeah. Brand built for athletes. That elevates sock performance by fusing expressive designs and technical features. Rob, you were a former world-class professional cyclist, particularly in downhill mountain biking. The company's located in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, and the branding of the slogan was "You got this," back with Endure. And why don't you give? I know that you sent me a text earlier today and you said you were kind of done the founder thing or that you've been talking a lot about it on podcasts and content. And I was thinking to myself after we were done texting, I don't even know what that means. And then I thought to myself, wow, it must really suck for this guy just to always be the kid who made good and just talking about that over and over and over again, when in fact your business is way surpassed that. And that's probably what you meant. And so it clicked for me after we were texting. So thank you for accommodating me. We're going to do a little bit of both this show. And then I promise you when we meet in the future, we won't go back to the founder stuff. Okay. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, all good. And yeah, for full context, I just feel like I've done a bunch of podcasts now. I mean, it was almost 2 years ago, I think we last recorded. So since then, and that was honestly one of the first few I had done, but since then it's been, I don't know, like 20, 30 or up to 50 different podcasts. And it's generally along the same line of like, how'd you get into it? How'd you start? And the founder story, the founding story. And there's been a lot of ups and downs. And perhaps on this episode, you can link to the original we did where we talked about kind of the co-founder buyouts and all the ups and downs in the early days. And yeah, I think I just did recorded a podcast last week and the week before, and it's just the same thing. And that's why I texted you. I was just kind of like, I think I've beat the founding story to death. If people want to hear more about how Endure came to be in my path, then just Google it at this point. So,
but also for you, it must be so 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Like you've got new challenges in your business and life.
Yeah, especially post rebrand. It's like I feel like we've kind of got this rebirth, and there's a lot of exciting things happening now and in the future that we're excited about. And I love going back and talking about it. But I remember actually getting off the last podcast. Like, man, I don't know how many more times I can tell the story. It's like even honestly, just meeting new people, new contacts, or a new lunch or whatever, coffee with another entrepreneur. So tell me your story. It's like, oh man, I'm getting tired of saying it a little bit. It's a good story, but I feel like I've done a decent job at getting it out there.
You should have a QR code of your podcast links, and you could just
exactly. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, here you go. I'd have to balance on how to not come across like a total dick doing that, but no, I think that the story is important though, and as you alluded to in the text, that these these podcasts all often have different audiences, and so it's, even though I'm saying it a million times, it's new to everyone else.
It's
so I
new
understand.
and value added. So having said that, just give a brief background on Rob Fraser, how we got here, what Endure was, and don't get into what it is, because after we do this segment, we're just going to go into new things on Outlet.
Sure.
But just some history and some background. And then when you're done that, I want to dive deeper into the partnership problem, because I just think that we can't talk about that enough for audience members, for new entrepreneurs, business owners. But let's start with just some background for context.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, what I call my past life, I was a competitive elite cyclist. That's how you and I met, which is pretty interesting how we're talking now. Oh man, 15 years later since I think we originally met, maybe a little longer, a little shorter, but
we decided you were 15 at the time.
Okay. So yeah,
just 15, to put that into context.
Years. Yeah. So yeah, long time. And yeah, so we're both racing bikes. And I think that's the beautiful thing about sport, is it brings together people of all different backgrounds, and you're kind of aligned and excited about one common thing. But then you go out into your real world, there's people that you and I know that are doing very different things all over the place. It's very cool. And you and I have connected in a similar interest now, 15 years later in business. And I think that's really, really interesting and unique. And same with some other people that I've kept in touch with that have found their way to entrepreneurship or business. But so yeah, raced mountain bikes, named the Canadian national team 5 times, traveled the world a few times racing, primarily, as you know, in Europe and in North America is where a lot of the stops are, some in kind of Australia and New Zealand. And that was about a 10-year career. Mid 20s, decided, hey, there's not a lot of money in this sport. And I'm also facing reality at that point that there wasn't a lot of money in the level I was going to get to. There's some money in the sport at the top 1% of the 1%, but I just had kind of missed the opportunity in hindsight, did some things wrong. Also, just injuries stacked up, and it just wasn't going to work out for me. Especially, I mean, I maybe could have made it to where I wanted to go, but it would have been another few-year journey. And by that point, to then have a career at that level and have the earning income, there'd be a short ride at the top. So just kind of looking to the future, decided, I'm going to walk away from the sport while it's on my accord, while it's my decision. I felt good about where I was at the time. That year where I walked away, I was still ranked second in the country after the national series, which was cool. So, I mean, even, in almost, 6-7 years since walking away, that's still something I get to be excited about. I decided to walk away. I was still competitive, felt good, could do it. And then kind of was like setting my sights on what's next. But that was kind of like entering a somewhat darkish 2-year period after chasing a goal for 10 years and it being fairly singular, and in hindsight, very entrepreneurial. I was like, what do I do now? Do I have to go get a real job? Do I go to school? And ultimately what I kind of ended up thinking was, if I can start a business in the athletic space, I can still be involved. I'll just be on the other side of the table. And as I've gotten more into business, I've realized that I call business, like, it's just the sport of business to me. I feel like I'm an athlete in the sport of business now.
Yeah.
A lot of the same things apply, as I'm sure the mindset, the taking care of yourself, body and mind, the team dynamics, the competition, the pressure, all of those things are still there. And so everything I loved about sport, actually the main things I loved about sport, directly translated into business for me, which was really exciting. And I had no idea. So that's kind of like the story of who I was and who I am.
Main thing being the hatred of losing.
Yeah, I mean, working on that, because as you know, in business we lose every day. Yeah, and I think last episode you actually held up a mirror to me, and I guess I was a quite intense kid, quite intense competitor, which I've often thought about.
I didn't mean that. In the last episode, yes, but what I just said right now, I didn't mean that about you. I meant that about every top end athlete. People think it's about they have to win. It's not that. It's that they're terrified of losing. They hate losing. And I think that applies to business as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's what drives you. I think one of my other friends said that high performers are just harnessing an anxiety disorder for productivity. It's what do we do? How do we just keep how do we just stay busy and avoid Well,
Yeah.
I say like real life, but I thought that was another interesting take. But I started a brand, and like it was a simple idea. I wanted to create an athletic brand around what I was going through at the time, which was kind of like perseverance and trying to find my path and find the new way. And that's what Endure was. It was just a brand that was around quite literally in the name to keep moving forward without giving up. And in terms of product category, we focused on performance socks because, as you know, again, in cycling, socks were a way that we expressed ourselves. They were a part of the kit that were unique to yourself and individual. They weren't necessarily supplied by your team or your jersey, where your
Right.
jerseys and the rest of your kit matched. Socks were a way that we differentiated ourselves. So the real aha moment in hindsight, again, nothing I'm going to talk about was a master plan. I didn't know anything I was doing for the most part. But my cycling socks weren't great in everyday life. So I went from cyclist to now I'm back in school, I'm working jobs, and they would fall down. They weren't that comfortable to stand on all day. They weren't great for all these other sports. And so when I looked at kind of the apparel landscape, the original idea was like build an apparel company, but then it was quite obvious that socks had been left behind in the athleisure movement. So I was like, well, I'll just focus as niche as socks. And if we decide to expand later on, then we can do that. But let's start small, an inch wide and a mile deep. And we wanted to combine kind of the expressive side of the sock industry, which typically was found in kind of fashion socks and business socks, and then merge it with the technical side of the sock industry, which is the sport specific socks, and create an all day performance sock. And over the last 5, almost 6 years now, put in $1,000 and bootstrapped it to multi 8 figures in revenue. And here we are on the podcast.
Yeah. And I do have to say, for those listening who are not buying the technical side of the sock argument, because I was one of those people, the socks are outstanding. Like they're, and I don't even know why. I'm not into the fashion part of it at all, personally. Right, in the designs, but one of my I won't say who, but a friend here in town in Fernie, British Columbia, bought me a pair, ironically, maybe 2 years ago. It's like, wow, they're really good. Like they don't ball up, they don't get the what's the word I'm looking for, but just sort of the lumps underneath, fall down. They're comfy. They're terrific. I have no idea why, but they're terrific socks. And so now I have a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So there you go. So one thing that I think is value added to the audience, I know we did cover this last show, so we don't have to hammer it home, but when you launched Endure as a brand new entrepreneur with no experience at all, you immediately took on a partner. And then that story went bad. And I feel like maybe this is still a current story, not a current story, but something you're happy to still talk about, because you do post it on your LinkedIn still currently, lessons learned from that experience. So you brought on a partner without a shareholder agreement, correct?
Correct.
And what was your thinking at the time? Why did you want a partner at all?
Yeah, so I would even push. I guess the thinking was very, very surface level, and it was as simple as this would be more fun to do with somebody, which
right, exactly.
anyone who has any experience in business knows that that's a terrible reason to go into business
by
with somebody.
Far the most common reason is to have a friend. It's about having a friend because you're nervous about the risk of it. I'm not saying you, but most people.
Yeah, and I mean, we're kind of taught that way our whole life. In school, we have partners and we do projects, and you don't think too much about it, and you date without thinking too much. And so when you start a business, I think, and I've reflected a lot on it, it's like most people, especially their first thing, they don't expect it to work. Really, you hope it works, but you don't, and so you kind of don't really weight the consequences of it working as highly as you do as it not working. So like the co-founder kind of thing, it was like, well, at least this will just be fun. We'll ride along together. And if it works, we'll figure it out. And if it doesn't, then whatever. So I often tell young founders now, or anyone starting the first business, is like, it's equally as important to ask yourself, what happens if this goes right? Because like, if you find yourself if the business is going right, which ours was, but the partnership's not going right, there needs to be resolution there. And there was no shareholders agreement. And that's when things get really messy. So the kind of thinking was, more fun to do with somebody. It wasn't really a fear-based decision for me. It was literally just like, this will be fun to work on. And I'm in a time of my life where like, I'd rather do it collaboratively. And I spent 10 years doing a relatively individual sport, and I wanted to do something a little more collaborative.
More team. Yeah.
And so that was kind of the thought process. And I just chose a friend I was doing school projects with, and we were good buddies and seemed to get along. So I was like, okay, let's do it and figure it out.
So that's new information for me. I thought this was more of a high net worth individual from your community, but it wasn't. It was a friend,
Yeah, so there was like two layers to the story. It was a friend I
peer,
was going
so
to
to
school
speak.
with. Yeah, a
Yeah.
friend I was going to school with, but then his uncle, who was a little higher net
Ah,
worth, was
okay.
the one that kind of like supported him along the journey and got his foot in the door at the company.
Gotcha.
And that's what made things really messy. But it all stemmed from the fact that like the co-founder I chose wasn't A, an entrepreneur, and B, really up for the task. And then everything kind of
Yeah.
spiraled from there.
Right. So you would advise new entrepreneurs to not bring on a partner for that reason, right?
Yeah,
There
definitely
might be
not. I
other
think like
reasons to have a partner, but that's
I
not
think
one of them.
definitely not one of them. I think it's in a like it would be in the conversation near the end. Do I like this person? Because like you generally it's not something you're going to weigh that heavily. But I mean, as you know, again, like you're in the trenches with these people, and I think in the early days you at least want to like them. It's hard enough
Yeah.
if you don't like the person, then it's going to make it even harder. But it's definitely not a one of the first five things I would look at. No, not at
Yeah.
all.
I always advise new entrepreneurs, people launching new businesses when they're covering this issue is, why can't you do it yourself? That's number one. Do it yourself. Well, I don't have this particular skill set. Okay. Step number two, could you just hire that skill set and not make them a partner? I can't afford it. They bring a lot more to the table, what have you. Okay. How do you get out of this partnership if things go bad? And how do you get out of it if things go good? As you said, that's sort of my decision tree. Does that make sense to you based on what
For
you
sure.
learned from this experience?
Yeah, I mean, like
And
if I'd asked myself that originally, like I did end up doing it alone. I just had someone riding along and getting the same, like all the benefits out of it,
exactly,
right? So it's like it just, yeah.
exactly. So this show is about momentum in business, well, and in life. When you had this partnership hiccup, how long ago did you start Endure? It feels like 3 years. Does that sound about right? 4 years,
No, it
maybe?
was September 2016, so we're almost 6 years in.
So, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm getting older, so time just kind of.
yeah, right. We hope it just, yeah. We're just staying still now. I hear you.
Yeah. So, and then the partnership breakup, how long into the company was that a year in or 2 years in?
About a year and a half, and then it took like another 6 months to resolve it. But he quit
Right.
at a year and a half. Yeah.
So from a year and a half to 2 years, you had this transition, which I'm sure was personally very painful for you. What did that do to your momentum of your business? And then how did you recover from that?
Well, anytime these sort of things happen, it takes a lot of your energy and focus and mental power outside of actual driving the growth of the business. And so the momentum shifted from, like putting all the energy obviously into the business and growing it to something outside of the business that was not it's like not beneficial at all. And often businesses and startups fail due to these co-founder disputes, like a lot of them, because like these are very hard
Yeah.
to recover from. Because you take your eye off the ball, and in those early stages where these businesses are so fragile, you can't afford 6 months of not keeping your eye. And so luckily, I mean, not luckily, I guess I just kind of had to work basically double time. So I worked like,
Right.
I would get up at 6 a.m. and I would make sure I was doing my work, and I would kind of work until 6 p.m. and then spend the night working on the other stuff, the legal stuff and the negotiations or whatever. So it, like, I still focused on the business for sure. But it definitely wasn't getting all my attention. So I guess like once it ended though, my focus immediately shifted to just like, I equated to like, I was trying to run at full speed with a parachute on, like those like guys that are training on
Yeah.
track. And the second the deal closed, I was able to buy it. My co-founder and partners was like that parachute got cut off, and like the momentum started to
Yeah.
build again. And that looked like, okay, well, I need to bring on a team, people that I need to hire out the roles and the tasks that now are left open due to the co-founder not being there. And then I could immediately start just making decisions that were bottlenecked through others getting in the way that I knew were the right decisions to make. And so that helped build more momentum and just executing. I'd say like the biggest problem during that period was having that bottleneck, and the decisions had to go through not just the co-founder, but then the other partner that was brought in. And it just like, we'd spend so much time just debating whether or not to do the thing rather than just do the thing and figure it out.
Just executing.
Just executing. It was so toxic. It was so,
which is really the key to everything, right? Just try it. Do something.
Well, especially,
just try it.
And they were like looking back, they were such asymmetrical bets. Like the downside was so low, the upside was high, but they were just like, they were just impossible to get approval on. And so immediately I was able to execute on those things like multiple times a day, whereas like before it was multiple like times a month. So I was like able to just 10x my productivity immediately.
Amazing. Let's move on to current day. And by the way, I'm going to ask you some questions about your business to try to get some context for the audience and some lessons learned and challenges that you've had to, get through and that you're thinking about. But you're a private business, and so when I cross the line, ask you something you don't want to disclose, just tell me you're not going to talk about that. That's all cool. I'm not doing it on purpose. I've just you're a pretty open fellow, and then we've actually talked just as friends, and we have a different level of conversation. And so I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. I'm not trying to do that. Just push back. I know you would anyways, but just want to make that clear.
Good. Yeah. No
now, you went through, for somebody with a consumer apparel type product, you did the unusual thing of rebranding that business. I say for somebody with that product, because in my world, in professional services, for example, we used to rebrand. I used to rebrand like every 2-3 years because it was a great way to get attention on Bay Street in the marketplace. Oh, we're merging with somebody now. We're called this,
Right.
But I'm pretty sure Nike hasn't rebranded in its, in its history, or certainly that I know of. But you went through this process of rebranding from Endure to Outweigh, a few months ago? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it launched on May 1st, which there was 6 months of work preceding that.
Yeah. And so you have restrictions on discussing sort of the background and why that happened. So I'm not going to ask you the how of that, the why of that. But if I were hypothetically thinking to myself, I would think, well, the only reason someone would do that if they were being successful with their current brand is that someone came along and made a challenge on IP or branding conflicts or whatever. But I'm not saying that for you. I'm just saying, broadly speaking, that's the only reason a company would go through this, is they had some conflict with somebody. So anyways, you don't have to talk about the why, but let's talk about the how, because that's an interesting thing to me. What was when it finally came to you that, okay, we're going to rebrand, how did you go about that process? And did you redefine the brand, or were you looking for a brand name that fit what you'd already built?
Yeah. So I agree with you. Generally, when companies like in the apparel space or something that like in our industry, the brand is one of the most important things. The name and the logo and the product, they're very important. It's what the consumer associates with. It is generally in like the apparel space, like one of your only moats as well, like is kind of the brand.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot of other IP you can acquire in terms of like patents and socks and stuff like that. So this isn't like proprietary software or something. It's apparel. It's pretty basic. So you really build your reputation and your worth in the goodwill and in the quality of the brand. So yeah, you're right. It is uncommon for successful brands to change their name. And you're also right that the reasons a brand may do that, generally and broadly speaking, are IP legal issues, or maybe they've gone stale on the market and they want a fresh look. So what I can tell you is we didn't want another make work project. So we definitely didn't feel the need to reinvent ourselves. But at the same time, we took on this challenge. And the initial kind of thought was like, this is going to be, as we've already talked about, there's been co-founder buyouts. We made it through COVID. There's been many other ups and downs in the last 6 years, but this one felt like it could be a death blow. Most things in business, Yeah, initially, like within the first day, after 24 hours, I kind of like worked through it a little more and was like, okay, like it's not a death blow, it's gonna suck, but the initial one, like this one, really felt like I don't know, like I said, it felt like it was the everything, like our name was everything, it was the main thing, and I've come to evolve my thinking on that, and I'll explain and I'll kind of walk you through it, but. So yeah, it was like, we're going to have to rebrand. What's that look like? One of the main mental exercises I went through was like, well, what is a brand? You know, like if we're going to go through this, like that sounds like a very rudimentary question to ask, but it's a very deep philosophical question, really. Like, sure, there's like, we built a brand, so we know something about it, but like truly, what is a brand? What is the actual, like, what is it to the human? What is it in our mind? So I kind of work in these frameworks or kind of analogies. And what I came up with was like, I believe a brand, if we're relating it to a human being, is kind of three core attributes. So the human, and I'll use you as an example, you have your name, you have your identity, how you look, and I would recognize you, and then there's your essence. So your name being Scott, if you were to come to me tomorrow and be like, my name's now Adam, I'd be like, okay, well, that's weird. I've known you for 15 years as Scott, but like, I might mess this up a few times, but like, doesn't change anything. Whatever. Like you're
Yeah.
Adam now. It doesn't change who you are. And then there's how you look. You know, if we get on this podcast and you're 100 pounds heavier, you've shaved your head, and I can barely recognize you. That'd be like a bit weird initially, but then we would start talking and be like, oh, this is the same person I've
Yeah.
known for 15 years.
I, I,
Nothing's changed.
I'm still Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So name, identity, okay, they're part of the brand, they're part of the human, but like it doesn't make you who you are. But then there's your essence, and that's the feeling I have when I'm talking to you, and if I'm explaining, like if I'm trying to explain to someone who you are, that's how I would explain you. That's how you make me feel. That's the like everything. Basically, it's your essence. And if I was to go on this podcast with you, and you were completely different than the Adam, the Scott, the person I knew for the last 15 years, like completely different, I would hop off and be like, I'm not quite sure that's the same person, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
when I looked at what we had to go through, we were keeping our essence, which I would equate to like our mission, our values, what we aim to do in the world, even everything to our product and everything that makes up our essence, what we are, what the mind share we have, that was remaining. When it came to identity, our product and our logo were remaining the same, which was great. So we're maintaining an identity, a visual reference, something that people could reflect on and see, like, oh, draw kind of like, oh, okay, new name, but here's the same identity. We even had that kind of post rebrand. People are like, this looks like Endure. It's like, well, it is. And then what we really had to change was the name. And when I went through that, I would argue that the name, among the three things, although very important, these things are all still very important. It was going to be like the least detrimental thing to do, because like we're going to keep our essence, we're going to keep our identity. And if we have those two things, people can relate to us and they can identify us, then they can associate that to a new name, which should be pretty easy if we do the storytelling right. So once I kind of worked through that, and like built that kind of mental model, that framework to like use and relate and help to help my team, like here's the task at hand, it became a lot less daunting. And then the question goes to, well, how do you pull it off, and how do you storytell? How do you bring the audience around with you? The second kind of thing was, if you're going to rebrand, who does it affect? And I said, like, okay, well, we have our past customers, they know us, so this affects them, and we have to do a really good job at telling the story and bringing them along. And then there's everyone who hasn't heard about us yet. This doesn't affect them at all. They don't know Endure from a hole in the wall. So like, let's just put that aside. All we have to do here is execute A, on telling the story and bringing the current audience along, and B, rebranding in a way that makes itself even more relatable to the future customers. So we kind of were able to kind of get two birds with one stone there. And so your original question of, you know, were we going to redefine the company? Not so much. We really dug into the essence and said, like, let's evolve our mission, let's evolve our values based on 5 years of data, consumer feedback, what we know to be true. And then under this new name, let's pick a name that champions that mission. So our mission evolved to, we basically asked like 1,000 customers. Like I can't even really explain how much work went into this rebrand over the last 6 months. It's insane. We were talking offline before this. It's been like 2 months of physical and mental recovery post rebrand with a lot of burnout because
Wow.
of it. But we talked to like thousands of customers and people associated with the brand. I asked them, like, why did you initially buy the product and why do you continue to associate with the brand? Like, what do you like? And what I kept hearing was like, oh, I buy the socks for X. And X was always some pursuit of something that was important to them, some personal best. It was, oh, I buy them because I was going to race a marathon, or I had an important
Right.
meeting, and the monster
Right.
socks give me a good feeling. And so I was like, okay, so people are continually buying this product and it's some sort of catalyst for their personal best. Like, our mission, like what we're aiming to do with this brand, is inspire people to pursue their personal best. That's the mission of the company. That's what we've been doing. We know to be true, but our customers have told us. So from there, like, what is a name that champions that mission? We know the product is expressive in nature. It helps people perform at their best with the technical features. It makes them feel good. It gives them an emotional reaction. And we thought, like, well, we want the name to be, like, the renaming process is like a million check marks. There's obviously everything from the legal diligence down to, can you get the domain name, social media handles, but then ultimately,
Yeah.
does it tell the story? And to us, we thought, like, if a mission was to, or if our mission is to inspire personal bests, like, that means that someone has to be willing to put themselves out there and carve their own way. And so that was like the name's an amalgamation of the out and the way, and there's out, way, and
yeah. Yeah.
And luckily it met a bunch of those other check marks, and we were able to do a lot of the legal diligence, file for our marks with a higher level of certainty.
And would you agree that the name itself is probably, I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's probably the least important part of everything that you just said at the end of the day?
Yeah.
It has to make sense, obviously, but like everything else, just to me, the essence of the brand, as you described it, is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also, it also depend based on, like, for our brand and our product specifically, the data actually shows us that when we put our name on things, it doesn't do as well, because people actually want the expressive nature and the individuality of the product. So if we sell like a sock with a fun design on it, they're expressing themselves. They're not a billboard for our brand name. Where the opposite is not true for some brands that I would say, like Supreme or Balenciaga, where, like, it's really important that the person's signaling that I'm wearing this luxury item. So
Yeah,
our
absolutely.
brand for the customer was a lot more about expressing their individuality and not their association with our brand. So, like, luckily, again, found ourselves in a position where the name was not as heavily, like, not as important as the other factors, which was the product quality and the experience that people expected and came to trust. So it's not like, so like broadly across the market, that's maybe not true, but in our case, it was definitely true that the name was the least important part of that thing, but also not discounting that it's still super, super important. So that's kind of the weird thing. But.
Younger people, entrepreneurs, marketers hate what I'm about to say because it just feels like so 1980s. And particularly social media marketers. But to me, one way I think about a brand personally is that it's a shorthand to communicate where a company or a product is on the old school 4 Ps of marketing. I don't even know if you know those, but price, product, distribution, and promotion. Distribution being anyways, those are the 4
Placement.
Ps. I forget why distribution is a P, but place, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So price point, product being really the essence things that you talked about. It's a high quality sock with designs intended to be your individual expression as opposed to a brand expression. Promotion being your social media ads and all the promotion that you do, and the place, the distribution being your online marketplace. And so if you take it away from Outweigh, and if I think about Apple, well, what do I think about on the 4 Ps? I think about a product that feels and looks great, it works, and it's really a subscription service in my mind, in the sense that all of my Apple products all sync together seamlessly, and I couldn't possibly leave Apple with any one of those devices or I would just be screwed. That's what I think about. Really high price point. I have to go to those stupid Apple stores and talk to a genius. And the promotion side of it is, it used to be Steve Jobs doing releases and the sort of the personal branding that went along with that. And the word Apple to me is a shortcut to explaining those 4 Ps. And the essence of marketing, old school marketing strategy, as opposed to branding and social media advertising and that sort of stuff. But marketing strategy is the 4 Ps are the things that you compete on with your competitors. That's really all there is. Like everything falls under those categories. And to me, a brand is a shorthand, just defines where you fit on those 4 Ps, right? And so when I look at Outweigh, well, you didn't change your price point with this. I didn't look, but I assume you didn't. All of your promotion is the same. The essence of your product is exactly the same. Your distribution is exactly the same. So you really haven't changed anything. The Outweigh sock fits into the marketplace at the exact same place that the Endure sock fit into the marketplace with the exact same, what's the word that I'm looking for? Features, essence that go along with it. Does that make any sense to you? When I
Yeah, it makes total sense
that way.
Yeah, and I agree. I think like a brand name is really just a
because
quick
it would have
trigger.
been. Sorry to interrupt you. It would have been a big deal if you changed your whole distribution network at the same time you changed your brand. That would have just, for example, screwed everything up.
Yeah, and that would have been a much bigger lift for sure. But yeah, I agree. I think like the brand name is essentially just a reference to the mind share in the consumer. Like when you said, here, another example to kind of illustrate what you said is, if I was to tell you Apple's designing a kitchen, you could close your eyes and probably imagine what it would look like. And
yeah,
that's
you
the power.
could.
That's the power
and
of
you
brand.
and you could even imagine how much you have to spend for it and where you have to go to get it.
Yes, and that's the power. And all I said was Apple. I didn't say, here's their pricing structure. Here's all this other stuff you just mentioned. Here's where it's
exactly
going to
my
be placed.
point.
I just had to say Apple. So I totally agree with you. However, like as simplistic as it is like the most simple things are extremely complex, and it took a long time for Apple to establish that word, to have that sort of mind share. So but I agree. I think it's not the end all and be all, and they could do it under a new name too. But you're right. Like none of the core essences or core attributes of our brand actually changed. It's just the name that people would associate all of those things they come to know, expect, and trust change. So we had to kind of retrain everyone to call us Outweigh and not Endure. But so far, so good.
Exactly. So at the same time you did this rebranding, more or less, I think I read that you did a financing at the same time. Am I right about that?
Yeah, which basically made this like harder. Just because we were like basically in the final stages of closing when this whole thing happened. And it was actually a pretty good gut check for the partners coming on, because I was able to, they were committed at that point, money was wired in this, but hadn't closed. So it's like, hey, you have an opportunity. Here's the state of play has changed here. Some of the reps of warranties I have in the agreement are now need to be reworded because, obvious reasons. And, but no problem if you want to bail, like I'll just wire the money back. And not one person bailed, and they all actually said like, Rob, this is an investment in you and what we know you can pull off. And whether it's Outweigh or Endure or XYZ, it doesn't matter. Like we back you. And so, that closed. And I'd say like, it was actually really, which is maybe something we could talk about too, but like, or follow up on another episodes, like this current financing and the new partners in the business is a really positive experience, because I was able to handpick the ones and dictate terms with a bit of leverage that I knew not to make the same mistakes twice. And it was actually a second hit at bat to get this deal done too, because the first time we just couldn't align on stuff. And I listened to my gut finally. It was like, this just ain't it. It doesn't matter. I don't care how good it could be. This doesn't feel right. And I'm not doing it. I've done this before. And we were able to come back to the table about 6 months later and increase the valuation by quite a bit and get better terms and see some alignment. And just basically, I said, you know what, we'll put a pause on the initial deal. I'll prove out some things I'm saying I'm going to do, and then we'll talk. And I was able to do that. Right. So we were able to come back to the table and put my money where my mouth is, basically. And so, we raised $3.2 million just to kind of accelerate a lot of things we were doing. And there's a time and place to bootstrap, and then a time and place to actually get some proper financing. And at the same time, brought on some people that had been there, done that in a lot of areas I wanted to accelerate and learn, and then also just help to, just have some really influential people to go to. And it was timely because I leaned on them a lot during the rebrand process. And more than anything, it helped me realize that like, this isn't it wasn't something that was happening to me. It happens to so many people, and these things just happen. And that's the real benefit of, I think, surrounding yourself with people that have had experiences, that they can show
Been there,
you that
done that.
these things happen, and they're not death blows. And so yeah, that was good. But at the same time, I now had the expectation that I pull this off and don't mess it up again, because like there's a lot of money on the line. It wasn't just, me, and I have my team and my staff and our partners. So the weight of it all was really heavy, that I couldn't really, fuck this up. So,
well, you had on that point, you had at least one kick at the can on an equity partner before, because we talked about that at the beginning, and maybe a second kick at the can, because at some point I think you were on Shark Tank and were accepted on that, and then that didn't go through. We don't need to go back on the history of that. I think we did that last show, if anybody wants to look it up. But what did you learn that you were determined not to go down that path again this time?
So some of the main things would be just an alignment on like the overall outcome and goals of the business, the time frame it would take to accomplish those goals, so that like the last thing I wanted, I think I proved definitely over since the buyout until this point, that like, I definitely do a lot of things wrong, but in general, I think I've got a pretty clear vision and ability to execute on what I think is the right path for the business.
Yeah.
And that's not to say it could definitely, I always also hold the belief that it could be done better, but I've yet to see by who in this current business. So I'll just continue to accumulate and collect and connect the dots from really smart people and apply them to this business. So I wanted to make sure that there would be a level of autonomy and control that I was able to maintain. So that was baked in. Basically, I just wanted them to be there with the financial support, with the money that we raise, and then be there when we need help. And if we don't need help, they're there to ride along and just be supportive.
Right.
And so far, I've got one. So we developed a board at the same time. It's really just a board of two, just me and another individual that represents the shareholder group. But that's really in place just to have some very high level guardrails in place, that I'm not going out and spending millions on things. But for the most part, on day-to-day stuff, I have a casting vote, and there's not a lot of issues there that I was talking about before with the initial partnership way back when, where like every decision had to basically go through three different people. So it was really things around, I would say, like the long-winded answer just put into a few words is that it was an alignment on values, time frame, and outcome.
Values, time frame, and outcome. And outcome being, where are we going with this company, and how do I get my money back?
Well, yeah, I mean, like that's the reality. I think a lot of founders don't understand is that when you take money, is that you're now responsible for a return. I think a lot of people think that like there's just like the investor just want in, they want equity. Like, no, well, it's like maybe a little bit, but like, no, they want to generate a return. And generally in these high risk bets, they want a big return. They can go get, 10% on their money, relatively low risk in many other areas. So if you're just going to provide a very nominal return, then what's the point? Why put up the risk? So the expectations that, like it's a big bet for some of these guys, and well, not big bet, but like it's a big bet on me in general. So it's like, I better live up to that and do what I say I'm going to do.
I think it's helpful for entrepreneurs trying to raise money to understand what investors are looking for, which is clarity on how they get into the deal. What is the structure? Is it debt, equity, some hybrid, in between? What are the valuations? Why do those make sense? Am I getting a good deal? Are there proper controls in place? And so that's like, how do I get in? How do I get out? What's the plan for that? And how do I protect myself in between? I mean, and if you just think about those three things, you can be a lot better at your pitch and in negotiations with investors, I think, which is pretty much exactly what you just said. So did this force you into a 5-7 year plan that has an exit in some way? Force you to think about that, or how's that going to work? Like
no force.
How are these, or did you already have that in mind?
Yeah, I went into it. I went into the raise with that in mind. So like, again, me dictating like my roadmap, but not anchoring to it at the same time because things changed. But basically with like kind of the understanding is that, and what I've kind of believe and have said is that within the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have options. It'll be up to us what we want to do.
Gotcha.
And I don't like actually saying, like, anchoring to what those will be. I'm not saying we're going to sell in 3 to 5 years. We're going to go public in 3 to 5 years. We're going to it doesn't matter. All I know is we're going to have options, because my number one focus is building a 9-figure best performance sock brand in the world by that 3 to 5 years. And I just know we'll have any option at our disposal at that point. So like, we're going to, that's the goal. Like, you don't want to focus too much on the end result, on the results. You want to focus on, like, what do you need to do right to get there, and just do that, because like the options will come. And what I've learned over the last 6 years is that, like, you generally never hit the target you're aiming at, but if you just do the right work over a long enough time, there will be many targets, and you just choose the one you want to go for.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you raise this money, and I think so now you're rebranding, you're raising money more or less all at the same time. I think you also changed locations. I saw it at the same time because you had nothing else to do. So you might as well start carrying furniture and fixtures across downtown Victoria to a new location that you're building out. Did I see you increased your product line? Did I see you introduce something else beyond socks?
We've got some caps that we do as kind of like a second category. Yeah. Okay. They're like, it's not, we are expanding the category, but the simple insight is there is, like, we try to basically, like, we're going to stay focused on socks, because I think there's a really great play in just like building an exceptionally large sock brand, especially when we talk about optionality in 3 to 5 years. But in order to, like, increase the value of the brand, especially like lifetime value, we want to introduce some new kind of tangential or like product categories that make sense but fit into kind of how we think about product, which is unisex, low size curve. Like, generally a cap is one size for adults. And then, like, what is the more expressive elements that people are wearing as a part of their everyday apparel? It's socks, watches, caps, sunglasses. That's kind of where we play. So caps were natural. We're launching our sunglasses again in a couple of weeks. And but beyond that, like, we follow like kind of the 80-20. Like 80% of what we do is going to be socks, if not more, 90+%. But then we'll have some products that are fun and follow the same kind of mission and kind of how we think about things.
So the money you raised went into general growth, like the location. I assume it went into some more marketing horsepower, advertising horsepower, hiring more people, those sorts of things. Is that generally the use of proceeds?
Yeah. And like, in full transparency, one portion of it was a secondary transaction as well.
Okay. Yep.
So, and like the thought process, then I'm open, I guess. I think it's also something that's not often talked about. It's like, thought was there as I spent 5 years building this business. And as you know, like, liquidity events are
rare.
They're rare, very rare. And you don't make money in business on a salary. And so the other consideration was bringing in partners again. It's like, well, this isn't going to be my thing anymore. It's going to be our thing, and there's going to be an expectation. And I want to make sure I'm basically de-risking on a personal level at a kid.
Yeah, so you took a small amount off the table because you have a young family.
Yeah, and like,
you're buying a house and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just to basically, and also the understanding that in order to accomplish the goals, the really large goals, the next 3 to 5 years, anything that's taking my eye off the ball and the focus, and if that's just like resources or worrying about my family or whatever, is just detrimental to anyone coming into the business. So it's like, let's just button that up. Also kind of just like recognize a small win for the past 5 years and a lot of the shit. And then, so yeah, the majority of money though into the company. And then the mandate there is basically like, how do we use this to identify and accelerate growth opportunities? You know, we run a profitable business too. So that's kind of what makes it a little more unique than most companies that raise, is we're not covering burn. So like, we don't really have like this, even on my investor updates, I'm not really saying, you know, we got 12 months of runway. It's like, well, we got infinite runway, because like, you know, we have a self-sustaining business and we're just going to use this cash to get on our toes. So that looks like extending, like, we can do simple analyses on basically like, when do we get paid back on an initial acquisition of a customer? So if we have cash in the bank, we don't need to rely on such a short window of payback. We can push that out and just like a simple kind of CAC to LTV analysis. So customer acquisition cost to the lifetime value of the customer. And at what point does that lifetime value kind of cross over into profitability of how much you paid to acquire them? So we can push that out. So we've done that just to be able to spend more to acquire and grow faster. Other things we're looking at is, like you said, yeah, just growing our operations. So we had to move spots. We've just like increased our staff over the last 18 months from like 5 to 25. And we did that before even the raise. Like we've done that just on the actual growth of the company. That's the investor funds are going towards really staffing or cover, like again, covering burn. Or we really make those decisions based on the actual needs of the business. Increasing inventory on hand, just because like the kind of the supply chain risk right now is high, and in order to get more efficiencies on just basically cost of goods sold and shipping rates, if we can afford to buy more at once, then we should buy more at once. And also with inflation, everything, our socks hold their value better than our dollars do in a bank account right now. So that's also a consideration. And then lastly, looking at which is I'm particularly excited about, is are there acquisition opportunities? Those could be horizontal up down market to just increase efficiency across the organization, because at our current size, the question is build or buy. And if we can buy something and apply our model to it that accelerates it, then it's probably a better use of our time and resources. So that's exciting in this market, because people are getting hammered right now, and we're in a pretty good spot, knock on wood. So there's a lot of good deals. And so, yeah, that's the mandate of the funds. But generally, broadly speaking, the mandate of the funds is how do you grow faster?
Growth. Yeah. Growth. And so I wanted to ask you, you and I may or may not have been drinking at a bar in Victoria maybe a year or two ago. And I was asking about marketing and talking about MERs, management expense ratios, in the marketing context. And for the audience, I've never done a show on this. And so if you're a listener, a longtime listener, you may not have any idea what I'm talking about. And this, to me, is not my world. So don't hold me to this. Rob, you'll correct me where I'm wrong. But direct response marketers in particular are able to mathematically figure out, hey, for every dollar that I spend on a infomercial back in the old days, or a short form Instagram reel today, or whatever it is, for every dollar that I spend, I bring back X dollars of revenue, right? Which is related to your customer acquisition costs in a sense. And so, back in the infomercial days, way back when, it would be a reasonable number would be 3.5, 3.8 as for every dollar I spend, I'll bring in revenue of that amount. And I don't want to disclose anything about Outweigh or Endure, our conversation back then, but you do a really good job on that, a surprisingly good job on that. And you can disclose as much as you want on that front, but my question to you is not the hard numbers of it, but why? Why are you so successful at that? And how is that challenge evolving over time or every day?
Yeah, and I agree. Yes, like MER, which is like basically like MER is basically a catch-all for like, because you could get if we're looking just at one channel, there's like ROAS, which is your return on ad spend, but MER is a catch-all for like basically total dollars into marketing and total revenue, and what's the ratio.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's a more mentally stable way to look at things, because the attribution on like the day-to-day, month or week-to-week, month-to-month ROAS can be hard to just stomach the ups and downs. But if you have a benchmark on like dollar in equals X dollars out, and that's where we're above water, below water, or profitable, then great. But so what we've done is, I think like the goal to having a strong MER is that you're consistently focused on just your retained audience, so your retention marketing, because like it doesn't matter how much money how many customers you can acquire if you can't retain them. That's like the fastest way to burn out, because you can, for many years, continue to pay to acquire and show growth. But if you don't have any retained customers, the floor is falling out beneath you. So I think what we've done really well is build a really solid foundation. And that was, I think, a function of not having money for a long time. So like all we could really do was invest in the product quality and the actual retention marketing channels, which was like our email list and on-site events and organic social media, all the things that are really long, slow, ways to grow. However, they're really sticky. I think like the true thing in business is the faster something comes, the faster it dies. You know, it's like if you can do something over a long period of time,
Yeah.
it generally stays along longer. I think I forget, I don't know who the quote was from, but like the half-life of a business is how fast it grows. So it's like if
Right.
if it takes
That's
5 years to
interesting.
grow, it
That's a
takes
good quote.
5
Yeah.
years to die. So
And
so I
if I
thought
could
about
put
that.
if I could put that same concept into my words, I think that part of your success from an MER math perspective is the strength of your brand. Because if you're just trying to get an MER on, I just created this, but I'm nobody with just that product, it's going to be X. But if you have a strong, dominant brand in your target space, if you have to go along with that direct response media, maybe that's what adds up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why I totally agree. And I think also why the rebrand seemed so detrimental is like that was a big part of our secret sauce was the retained audience. And so, yeah, I think that's been like success. And for us, like success looks like anything over 5. And that's generally really good. Like 3 is kind of benchmark, I would say, like you kind of alluded to for most brands. So like $1 and $3 out.
Yeah, I would have thought 3.5 to 3.8, somewhere in that range, but it entirely depends on your margin as well, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of brands in the current state, if they're high growth, they're probably closer to 1 or under 1. A lot of brands are losing tons of money on marketing right now. I mean, just look at if you go to look at any of the public filings of any direct to consumer brands recently, if we're talking like Warby Parker or Allbirds or all these other, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year and their MER is not great because it's getting really expensive to acquire online. And I think they've really outpaced their acquisition spend as it pertains to the retention, as well as like D2C is getting really tough because of the rise in everything from getting the product, like container costs and raw goods and all the turmoil in the world, right down to just last mile, like how much we're paying for shipping to the consumer. It's all increased. And you see a lot of these brands actually shifting back to B2B models because they realize, selling in volume is actually pretty nice. So it's pretty funny to see like in the current market, everyone's really reverting back to basics, the fundamentals. And it really is like, it's kind of funny. I like it because I've always lived in like the real world, I call it, not this kind of la la land that it seems like people have been in for a few years. So I like that things are fair price and they make sense. And like, I mean, businesses should be valued on, their EBITDA multiples and other considerations and not be 100x revenue, perhaps, So, so anyways, I would say like you'd be surprised that I think a lot of high growth brands that took on venture capital, I wouldn't be surprised if their MER was over 1.5 or 2.
Really? I need to dig into that more, but thank you for letting me know that. I'm getting to the top of the hour here. One more segment just before we get to our last question. I'm a turnaround guy, and for 30 years, I've been working with companies that get themselves into financial trouble. And if I were asked to create a list, which I haven't been asked to, but if I were, as to why companies get into trouble, some of the top reasons would be substance abuse, addiction. Somebody's a real success, and then their personal life sort of takes a bad turn into business as an owner manager. Companies that family breakups, divorce, these sorts of things create problems on the business. But another big one is the transition from, a small, medium-sized business to a larger, medium-sized business, where the business grows outside of the capability of the founder, owner, manager to keep their arms around everything and to be a success. They are forced to implement systems to manage a business rather than run it themselves with their people, right? And I don't mean that like in HR, where hey, we're a team. I don't mean to diminish that, but for many successful small businesses that start from nothing and then grow. And by the way, in a Canadian context, I find a lot companies start to struggle around $50 to $100 million in revenue with that transition. And I see a lot of troubled companies as a result of that. Their leadership just failed to put in systems to deal with that size of business, and were unable to do it themselves as a one-man show with the team around them. And so I don't know the size of your business. You refer to yourself as sort of top line 8 figures plus and some multiples in there. Like it's coming for you, this transition. And are you thinking about that? Have you got plans in place? Like, how are you going to handle that as a leader, owner?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. And I think like I've luckily part of like the partners I've welcomed into the business or have done this, and they're a few of them are like would consider themselves experts at it and know the importance. And I mean, one of the most important things is like a founder is to like make yourself fairly redundant, at least in the day-to-day, like as soon as possible. You want to hire the people that you can delegate out to. Like my job, like I don't do anything day to day. It sounds funny to say, but like I've been methodical about like I need to put your job is, let's walk it back. Your job in the early days as a founder is to do everything. I'm packing the orders, I'm shipping it, I'm literally doing everything. You need to deeply understand your business. And then once you can do it, you need to hire the person that can get hyper focused on that one thing, whether it's ops, marketing, product, sales. And then they can do everything in those silos. And then they need to build people that can hyper focus on the different parts of those silos. And then you're building the organizational hierarchy structure up from there. And so I've been really methodical since day one of doing that, and basically making sure that like I remove myself from those things, because I really look at my job is to 3 things. Really, the first and foremost being like a laser focus on the vision, mission, and values. So making sure that the ship's headed in the right direction, that it's very clear across the organization where we're going, why we're going, and how we're going to get there. Number 2 is continual investment in product, people, and brand. So making sure we're always recruiting, retaining, and finding the best people, that we're continually pushing the ball forward with our product. We don't ever want to like get comfortable. It can always be better and always be improved. And then the brand, make sure that we're making the right investments to make sure that the brand is around the long haul and we're protecting it, we're investing in it. And then third is just establishing ourselves and our team as voices of influence as well as credibility in the space. So when we say something or we make a move, it's followed or it's taken seriously. And so that's what I work on every day. And really to work on those things is just a lot of conversations, a lot of reading, a lot of mentor stuff.
Yeah.
Really acting, I'm more now than ever treating myself more like an athlete in this. Like my day is not sitting at a computer. It's not hyper scheduled. It's not 9 to 5. It's going to the gym midday. It's going for a walk with a podcast. It's having conversations like these. And it was actually illustrated nicely in a recent podcast I listened to on the Knowledge Project with Kanal. And he said like a high performer's job and a founder entrepreneur is to collect and connect dots. And you do that by surrounding yourself with other people that are collecting dots. And the more conversations you have, the more you connect those dots. And then you take those insights and those learnings, distill them, pass them along to the people that you're delegating down the tasks and grow the organization. So I find it's like, I say my job's to have one good idea a month.
Right.
And like, so if I can do that, it's perfect.
The business is not reliant on you personally, which is amazing. Good for you. Keep an eye out on that. I can tell you I'm the opposite. I went down with COVID for a couple of weeks recently and everything just went to shit. So
and that's,
you're in that
funny,
situation,
right? Because you know better, right?
Even
the people
totally.
that know better find themselves in these things too. So
exactly. Rob, this show is called the Winning Momentum Podcast. The premise for it is that 90% of new businesses never, ever pay their founder a living wage. I don't know if you knew that or not. And of the 10% that do, 80% of those never create transferable shareholder value. In other words, they can't raise money like you just did. They're never going to be able to sell. And so what you end up with is 2% of new businesses actually are capable of creating some wealth for the founders, which is a pretty small odds. And to me, if we can help to educate business owners at whatever stage to improve those odds a little bit, that's why I do this content. And the reason I focus so much on momentum, you'll know this from your athletic days as well, is when things are going bad, no one wants to hang around with you. You repel energy, you repel resources. And when things are going good, including in your business, When you have winning momentum, you attract resources. People want to invest in you. People want to work for you. People want to work for, and you don't even have to be making money. You are, but you don't have to. As long as you're going in a winning momentum direction, in a positive direction, you attract resources. You, as an athlete and as an entrepreneur, have experienced many negative momentum, I'm certain, times in your life and in your business career. Can you give us 3 of your strategies to turn things around?
Yeah, I would say the first thing I would do is just always remind myself that nothing's ever as good or bad as it seems. So, and it's important because that goes both ways.
Yep.
And it's so like the takeaway there is like just try and remain in the middle, not get too high and not get too low, because there's so many ups and downs in business that if you're too attached to the highs, you'll chase them and probably make bad decisions and get a little impatient. And if you get too low, you might never find yourself out of the rut, and then you'll never find the momentum again. So that'd be the first thing, is kind of reframing the situation you're in. Is like, look, this isn't as bad and this isn't as good as I think it is. 2, I would say like a state change. So similar to point 1, but being just like, remove yourself from the current moment. Just go exercise, go run. If it's a more acute thing, like maybe it's an employee issue or a day-to-day thing, like for something that's a little more long-term, like a state change might not work. It might help you think through it a bit more, but like for an acute problem, like I think a state change is more important, to just get yourself out of the rut and just be like, again, kind of reverting back to this isn't as all consuming as I think it is. Like, and I don't need to deal with this right now unless something's literally on fire. It's like, do I need to respond right now? No. Okay, then don't. Take a breath, wait 24 hours. And then just make the right decision. Because like, if you're reacting on gut or instinct or out of emotion, like you're generally going to make the wrong decision, and the wrong decisions are the things that impede momentum. Like just like slow down, take a breath, and just like think through the problem. And then the third one would probably be more around just like patience and like listening to others, like not necessarily not asking the question to others, like, what would you do? But like, how would you handle the situation? And using that as like a way to guide your decision. Like you don't generally want to you want to come up with your own way of solving things, but rely on the paths other people have taken to kind of give you the map, give you the roadmap on how to get there. So I say like the more people, again, just back to collecting and connecting dots, like the best way to develop more and more momentum is to just build on top of what people are already doing. Like the answers are out there, you don't necessarily, people want to like hang their hat on being like a genius or being totally original. But like, I've always been a fan of like, I'm just going to apply an original, like a new original way of kind of already doing what others have already done. And that's what like, I think you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. You can just do it your own way. So yeah, I mean, like those are the 3 things, just like reframing it, not as good or bad as it seems, to kind of like just being patient and understanding like, do I need to react right now? And then 3 is just like utilizing those that have done it before you to just kind of like build on that momentum. You don't need to do it all yourself.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This has been the Winning Momentum podcast with our guest, Rob Fraser from Outweigh. Any parting comments here? Do you want people to reach you somehow, or?
Yeah, if people want to check out the brand or product, it's just outweigh.com, spelt as you would imagine, outway.com. If people want to connect with me, Twitter and LinkedIn are the best. It's just at Rob Fraser. You can find it quite easily, and I do my best to respond if people reach out. It's generally, if it's not spammy or trying to sell me something, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Otherwise, yeah, this was super fun, Scott. It's always great chatting, and it was fun chatting through the stories again. And like you mentioned, I guess in text too, it's like you have a different take on it. So I appreciated all the questions, and this was a lot of fun.
Was it a different take?
Yeah, because you also like generally like on some podcasts as well, like people haven't been through it, and I know you've been through some stuff as well, so that you can apply your own insights and lessons, and maybe it's a little more of a rally, not so much of me hitting against the wall. So it was fun. Cool.
Well, it was great seeing you again. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Winning Momentum podcast. Check me out at thescottsinclair.com, new website. You can hit me up there. That's it. Talk to you later, Rob.